Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 941, and today's date is April 10th, 2016, and the title of the episode is The Current Economic Collapse News Brief. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, as we know, the central bankers, they would like to get rid of cash and go to some type of electronic currency to keep that currency inside the banks, because if it's physical, people have the ability to take it, put it under their mattress, they have the ability to take it out of the bank, and then the bail-in documents are kind of a waste of time. And we're starting to see calls out there, the ECB saying that we should get rid of the $500 euro note, Larry Summers saying we should get rid of the $100 bill, and we see at this point that Japan is moving towards something completely different. And the war on cash just got really serious, because what they're trying to do at this point is they're trying to make everyone use their fingerprint to buy things. So the government's going to test this new system, which will enable people to buy things at stores using only their fingerprints, thus enabling full monitoring, full control, make sure they track every piece of spending or saving or anything like that using biometric data. And they would like all foreign tourists to use their fingerprints as they enter the country. Now, the question is, where is all this information going to be kept? What are they tracking? And this seems like this is a precursor to placing a chip in our arm. Because once one country does it, this is going to spread to other countries, and you'll be tracked every single place, not just for spending, but this data will have to be traded with other countries. And this is exactly what they're trying to push. Now, we know the battle with the FBI and Apple kind of came to an end when they couldn't get any traction on getting the keys to the kingdom. And the FBI said, okay, we're going to back off. And all of a sudden, a company appeared out of nowhere from Israel and said, listen, we have the ability to break into the phone. But of course, as we discussed much earlier, we already knew this was possible because John McAfee has already proved it. But what's very interesting is Director Comey, who's so interesting in getting into the privacy of every single person. He doesn't want people spying on him. He's worried about people viewing him through the video camera on his computer. So he places a piece of tape on his laptop. Now, as we know, the people who are in the government offices or above that, who are trying to push certain laws on us, laws pertaining to them are usually a little different. They have one set of laws for the people and another set of laws for themselves. Case in point, Obamacare. As soon as that came out, the government decided, you know what, we're going to exempt ourselves from this. Actually, the staffers who complained said, okay, what we'll do, we won't allow this to happen to you either. And we see right now, this is continually happening where there are two separate laws. And he's very concerned about his privacy, and he's trying to make it seem like, oh, I saw someone else put a piece of tape on my camera, so I did the same thing. Now, we also see this with David Cameron, who's calling for privacy about the Panama Papers and his offshore accounts. He's saying, oh, the family matters are private. But of course, he passed bills that allowed people to, or the government to spy on other people. But when it comes to them, they like to keep their privacy. Now, something very interesting just happened out in Ukraine. The Prime Minister decided to resign. That's Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. And we know Yatsenyuk was put into place by the U.S. government, the central bankers, after the coup d'etat. He was chosen way before the coup d'etat even occurred. Now, what's very interesting about all of this is that the resignation came at a time where the Dutch decided to vote down the referendum for Ukraine to join the EU. So it looks like they're trying to get rid of some people, make it look a lot better, and maybe convince the world that, yes, they can join the EU. Now, this also happened during the Panama Paper leak. So we see two things happening all at once, and we're going to have to watch this situation very carefully and see what occurs in Ukraine. North Korea, They had a massive internet outage for about 3 hours or so. This is very suspicious. Maybe the whole entire thing was brought down so something could be plugged in, and when it was turned back on, there was no detection or anything like that because everything was booting up. But we'll have to wait and see why they had this massive internet outage. We know they have infrastructure problems and things like that, but it's just very interesting that it all came down at once. Now, we know the Human Rights Organization is looking into the case where a marketplace in Yemen, they were hit with U.S.-made bombs by Saudi Arabia, and we know Saudi Arabia is doing the bombing in Yemen, taking orders from the United States. And the United States has come out and said, we have no responsibility for what happened in Yemen whatsoever. And the Human Rights Organization is saying, yeah, you are responsible because you're orchestrating what is going on in Yemen. You're also selling the bombs to Saudi Arabia, and they're using it on certain targets, which the United States, of course, is pointing out, saying, please bomb this area, please bomb that area. And we see the United States does bomb civilian areas, especially in those countries where they're trying to remove the elected government, or there are people in that country trying to push out the puppet government, and they're trying to make the entire country pay for that. We see it happening in Ukraine. We see it happening in Syria. We're now seeing it happen in Yemen. It happened in Libya, in Lebanon, in Iraq. And this is a pattern that we're continually seeing over and over. Now, John Kerry came out, and he was out there, and we discussed this before. He wanted Iran to help stop the wars in Syria, to help stop the wars in Yemen. And Iran came out and said, well, it's really the U.S. that should stop in these areas. And they said, if the U.S. seeks stability, it should leave the region and stop supporting terrorism in the area, which I absolutely agree. The United States supports Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, the Islamic State, and they use these forces as a proxy army to cause chaos, wreak havoc in the region, to remove governments. And once those governments are removed, a puppet government is put into place. And of course, anyone who opposes those puppet governments, the United States calls them Al-Qaeda, which allows them to use that legislation that says if there's Al-Qaeda in any of these countries or anywhere around the world, they can use drones. So I agree with this, and we discussed this before. It's the United States that is pushing terrorism in this region, all to support the petrodollar and the central bankers' way of life. Now, we see the unity government is taking more and more control of Libya at this point. They have just formed an anti-militia force. What is that? Well, we saw Ukraine create an anti-terrorism force. They're doing the same exact thing. They want to crack down on militants bent on destabilizing the city. Basically, translation is all those people who object to the unity government, we have this force, this secret police force now, that will go out and remove those people. And it's called the Special Deterrence Force. And we see this happen in every single one of these countries. They're not going after the Islamic State. They're not going after Al-Qaeda. All those people who don't want the puppet government in there, guess what's going to happen? They are going to be removed, drones will be used, and you'll never hear from these people once again. This is what these forces are used for. Now, we understand the United States wants to bring in more troops into Iraq, and we realize the agreement with Iraq that they have is that they're only allowed a certain number of troops in there, like 3,800 or so. But the United States is working around that agreement by calling all the other troops temporary. So we have 3,800 plus another 3,000 or so inside the country. And the Iraqi prime minister is saying, hey, you know something? We are not requesting any more troops, but the U.S. is continually sending them in. Now, the U.S. is sending strategic bombers to Qatar. They have sent B-52 bombers. They have landed in Qatar. And these bombers are going to be used for the next offensive in the area of Libya. It's going to be used in the next offensive in Syria and Iraq. And we can see things are really building up. As the Islamic State is being pushed out of this entire region, especially Syria and also Iraq, we see that the United States and the coalition forces are building up more and more military assets in this region. They're bringing in more troops. They're making more bombing runs. And they're increasing what we've seen in the past. Now, this is a head scratcher because as Russia continually push out to the Islamic State and the Syrian armed forces take more and more of the territory back in Syria, why do we need more all of a sudden? They had almost 18, 19 months before where they weren't bringing in any more. So we can see at this point they are definitely planning something else at this time, because we know the Islamic State is the proxy army of the United States government central bankers, and they're not really fighting the Islamic State. So we also see in the same region that the U.S. Navy is going to lead a 30-nation maritime exercise in the Middle East at the same exact time. Now, of course, they're using the cover story that they're going to do this to help protect international trade routes, of course, protect the oil, train the people in this area for what is coming. We also know that NATO, with Germany, the UK, and many of the other coalition forces, have brought ships into the region to help with trafficking of humans with all the refugees. But we know this, again, is a cover story. So we have a lot of warships all in this region ready to go. Now, the U.S. is out there, and they just put out a warning yesterday about credible threats in the area of Istanbul and Turkey. Israel's doing the same. The other coalition forces are doing the same exact thing. They're saying something is about to happen in this region. Now, is it going to happen in Turkey? Well, this is where the warning is coming out. But this could happen, this next false flag, this could happen anywhere throughout Europe, in the United States. We don't know exactly where yet, but we know they're going to use the next one to push their agenda, to make it seem like the Islamic State is still powerful, that they still have the ability to strike. But we all know this is an inside job. We all know this is a false flag. And we all know what they're trying to do at this point. The United States is against the wall. Their back is against the wall. The coalition forces, same thing. Russia has been freeing Syria of the Islamic State, the proxy army of the United States government central bankers. And what's next here is to do something to create chaos in the region. This is their next plan. We saw it happen back in 2014. We had the Geneva 1 talks in January, February. We had the Geneva 2 talks going forward in March, May. We had the election of Assad in June. He was reelected with 80 or so percent, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, well, it wasn't really nowhere, we knew they were training these huge forces in Jordan, in Turkey, and all these regions, and all of a sudden we saw this new force come out of nowhere called the Islamic State, which went into Iraq, established the corridor from Iraq to Syria, established a corridor from Turkey to Syria, and all of a sudden there was havoc and chaos in the entire region, because they can't let the same thing happen again. They know once the elections occur, they know the people of Syria are going to look at Assad and call him a war hero. They got rid of the Islamic State, they got rid of Al-Qaeda, they got rid of al-Nusra, they liberated towns, cities, and they gave the country back to the people. And the U.S. government central bankers, they know this. This is why they're preparing for something huge. This might be the last false flag that we might see that brings us to war. Because we already see that out in Ukraine, that cyber attack that occurred, that was a test. They were testing the system out to see if they can bring down the power. Because we know that's what they're going to do here in the United States, most likely in many different areas throughout the world, to prove that the Islamic State or Russia or China has the ability to do this. Because once they do some type of physical attack, they're going to follow it up with other attacks, and those are going to be cyber, because they need the physical to get that fear from the people, and then they can take that fear and use cyber attacks. Because remember, cyber attacks aren't really physical. It's very hard to show unless you say, oh, look, we had a physical attack, and now China, Russia stepped in, and they took down the power. They took down the financial system while the physical attacks were going on, because they knew we were weak at that time. And we see already there are reports coming out and they're looking at the Ukraine cyber attack. They have now completely blamed it on the Russian government in Ukraine, saying that they're the ones who are responsible for taking the power out in Ukraine. They have the ability, they're using black energy, and that is a piece of malware. And we know that this came out many, many years ago, and many groups use this malware. But of course, they're trying to link this to Russia. They want everyone to know who the enemies are going to be. They want everyone to know who is going to make this happen, because this entire system is coming down. It's collapsing. It's accelerating. Just like we heard from David Stockman, this is a dead cat bounce. This is the part of the illusion. And once that illusion stops and all of a sudden everything starts to crash once again, they are running out of time. They know this. They need to do something to blame all of this on some other country, some other group. And this is why, as we go throughout this year, it is going to get worse and worse as time goes on. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.